Today we're going to talk about trees and plants. Okay, so trees and plants is the topic today. Yay! Yay. Cool. So a lot of trees, and we talk about reforestation, but let's first of all talk about deforestation. Okay, what are we doing worldwide, and what have we been doing for a long time is deforestation. And I don't know the numbers, but the numbers are very scary. Okay, we're deforesting much quicker than we're reforesting currently, and we have been doing that for a long time. So we'll talk about some of the functions of trees today, and some of the reasons we need to reforest and how we can reforest, etc. Okay, so what are some of the reasons we want trees? Okay, trees for us as humans, they are important for a number of reasons. One, the table we're sitting on, is made of wood. So we do use wood for construction, for furniture. Okay, so we should be harvesting wood for those reasons sustainably. Okay, I'll give you an example. So what's sustainable forestry? When in some indigenous cultures, when a baby was born, they would plant trees. Okay, and when that child was 20 years old, getting married, thinking about starting a family, they'd say, there's the wood for the house you're going to need. And we planted it the day you were born. And that tree is now matured 20 years later. And that's forward thinking. That's planning, for, some trees need much longer than 20 years. Okay, there's other cultures, they're thinking 5, 6 generations ahead, 9 generations. They're planting trees that will be harvested 250 years later. They're much slower growing. Okay, so we just need to think about the future, we need to plan, okay, and we can do that. We've got the space available to sustainably harvest wood for our needs of furniture and building, okay, done properly, done well. We also should be planting forests for conservation. Okay, so it could be conservation of the tree itself, or it could be associated species. Okay, it could be a monkey, or bee, insect, or a flower, all the associated species that go with a particular tree. Okay, so we need to think about conservation. And we can also think about food forest. So we're talking about fruits, nuts. Okay, we can design a food forest which can provide us a lot of the food that we need to be able to live a healthy lifestyle. And then there's other things like rainfall, climate. Forests are very important for those things, and we're going to go into those into more depth. Okay. I get a lot of people here from Canada and other people who work in Canada planting trees. Okay, they had this, they had this one guy here who was a high baller, planting 3,000 trees a day.
What the fuck?
Tough job. Okay, yeah. But 3,000 trees a day, that's what he planted. Okay, but what kind of trees is he planting? He's planting the same tree. It's a monoculture. Doing same tree, same tree, same tree, same tree, same tree, same tree, same tree. Okay, so when we're talking about reforestation, let's be careful what kind of reforestation. Okay, we should be looking to replicate a natural environment. A natural environment is like this. In the Amazon rainforest, if you can find 2 examples of the same species of tree in 1 hectare, then you're being pretty lucky. Because usually it's about, there's such biodiversity in somewhere like the Amazon, it's about 2 examples of 1 species in a hectare. Okay? That's probably okay, sure, that's the Amazon. It's one of the most biodiverse regions of our planet. But even in other places, there's always a variety, almost always. Maybe, you know, above the snow line, you just get like the conifers, the evergreens. But mostly there's always a variety of trees. And yet us, as humans, we like to one species, monoculture. What's the problem with monoculture? Okay, lots of reasons. I'll give you another little story. So when I was a kid, I was growing up in England, of course, and this is a time before the internet. Let me just say that again. This is a time before the internet. I know you guys can't quite fathom that, right? This was a time when we didn't have cable TV. No, what? I don't. We did have color TV. Okay, it was not that old. Okay, but the weather forecaster, he gets on the TV that night and he says, you know, tonight's going to be a calm, clear evening. Okay, his name's Michael Fish. He's famous for fucking it up. Okay, and so what happened was that evening was the biggest hurricane in living memory hit the south coast of England. Okay. And you woke up in the morning and the neighbour didn't have a roof on the house and there was trees down. It was like a disaster zone. It doesn't happen so often in the UK. You know, we get bad weather but not extreme weather. And anyway, so the other story was the big loser was the pine forests. Okay, you know, pine is a good wood and easy to grow. It's very popular. But if you plant it in a plantation, a monoculture, then it's potentially susceptible to whatever, you know, hits them all at the same time. So in this case, it was a wind. It knocked one down, it knocked them all down. You know, I don't know how many million trees in that one evening, but a lot. And you know, market demand, supply, demand. So there's oversupply, the price goes down. It's valueless to anybody, and you know that's no good for from a farming point of view, from a ecological point of view. It's just a disaster. Okay, the same goes for diseases. Okay, if you get a disease, you know, we're living in a time where the world is increasingly smaller, and diseases do come from other parts of the world, and there's no natural predator. You know, we get a lot of beetles from Asia going into Europe and North America, and there's no natural predator, and suddenly you get all these trees that are dying. If they're all the same tree, they're all dead. But if you've got a variety, then yeah, you lose some, but you keep some. You know, there's always a backup. Okay, the same with fire. You know, we've all witnessed fire up here. Hopefully some of those may survive. But you know, in a natural forest, you'll probably find there's resistance to fire, in pockets of resistance. Okay, so it's always better to have a variety. You know, be it for wind or drought or for flooding, whatever. You know, whatever kind of event it is, if you've got variety, there'll be resistance, and there'll be, you know, even if you had that heavy wind, the hurricane, and you had some trees at the front that were stronger, they would protect the trees behind them. You know, suddenly there's a triangle of protection. You know, and there's a few million trees that didn't fall down. In another part of the world, and this is another story which affects us all today, we have the scenario of places like Malaysia, Indonesia, and the story of palm oil. Okay, so I've personally been to Malaysia, and I've been out and I've looked around and I said, wow, look, it looks really green. You know, it's a nice green country. And then you kind of take a second look at it, it's all the same colour green. And then you kind of realise that it's all just palm. It's like, and then you go to a national park, and they're quite small, and the biodiversity in the national park is amazing. You know, wow, look how it used to be. You know, I haven't been to Borneo, but I hear it's amazing, and they're chopping it down today. You know, and we're familiar with the story of the orangutan. Okay, it's the famous poster boy of, you know, palm oil right now. You know, how to go against a particular crop. So the problem with palm oil is not palm oil, it's the way that we plant it. Okay, it's the monoculture plantation. Palm itself is no problem, the oil itself is no problem. But when you chop down everything and you just plant that from there to there as a monoculture, it destroys, all the natural environment. And all you find in a palm oil plantation is palm rats that eat the palm and cobras that the plantation owners put in to eat the rats. Only 3 species. And yet in a natural, rainforest there, you've got hundreds and thousands of species. Okay, so massive disaster. So what can we do about that? This is the point where I've mentioned before that we as individuals do have a choice. We can buy something or not buy something. So if we're informed and we make informed decisions, every euro, peso, dollar, pound, whatever currency you're using, that's a vote for the kind of world you want. If you want a Coca-Cola world, carry on buying Coca-Cola products. If you don't, boycott them. If you're not happy with the palm oil products, don't buy them. You can imagine the board of Nutella famously use palm oil currently, and they say, hey, I'm the CEO, you're the sales manager. How's sales this quarter? And he said, well, they're down 20%. They're down 20%? What happened? Well, everybody's kind of upset about palm oil. Well, Mr. Production Manager, could we change something? And you say, yeah, we could, do this and that, change product, we could prove to people that we're using sustainable systems. That's the consumers changing by boycott, by voting with their pocket. So what's next? Let's just talk about reforestation then. How can we actually go ahead and reforest an area? So there's a number of options. The first, maybe do nothing. Okay, just let nature take its course. Okay, if there's already a nice little bit of forest around you, then there's seeds and they're getting dispersed. Okay, and so maybe the most effective thing is to just do nothing. Let nature repair itself, and it will do. Okay, so that could be one option. The second is, perhaps that the seed dispersal is far away, and we're actually going to have to bring seeds from far away and be the mechanism of delivery. Okay, and so we're going to have to be a bit more active here. So I've talked to you about swales. This is a very useful thing if water is going to be an issue. So again, we've got a hill, and let's do it from this way. Okay, so we make our little hill and we plant our trees here. Okay, and we can put them on rows, almost like terraces, and we can build up a landscape like that, and the water is going to collect here. What are we going to do with the soil? Okay, so forest soil is usually full of fungi. Okay, so it'd be good when you're transplanting, when you're bringing a tree and you're transplanting it, that you also put in forest soil. So you're putting in the fungi that may not be there. Okay, and that's really going to help reduce the stress of transplanting. The plant, the roots of the tree will be invaded by the hyphae of the fungi, and they will extend the ability of the plant to capture nutrients and water. So they're a very good relation. Okay, the fungi and the tree are essential to each other. Okay. We can also plant other trees which are going to be beneficial. Okay, so it may be the case where if we planted a native tree, the native tree may not be strong enough for the conditions. The conditions may be so extreme, there may be very little water, very little nutrients, very little decent soil. that they're too difficult, and the native tree just can't handle that. It needs a helper. It needs like a first phase. So in this case we could use pioneer species, okay? Like for example acacias, eucalyptus, okay? They're trees and plants that are very hardy. They need very little water, very little nutrients, and they will improve the conditions. So I've been involved in a forestry project where I was actually chopping the trees down. Okay, we were chopping acacias down because they had done their job. They'd been planted some 10, 15 years before, and they'd done their job. They had put lots of humus into the soil, they'd increased the organic material, they had allowed the water to get in there, but they were so competitive that the native species couldn't compete against them. So we were actually chopping them down to then replant with a native species. So it was like a phase 1, phase 2. Okay, it's a long process sometimes to able to rehabilitate the land, depending on what state you're starting with. Okay, you have to observe. If the soil's great, the conditions are easy, go ahead and plant, you know, whatever you want to. But if the conditions are hard, you're going to have to think about, how can I get to where I need to go? Am I going to have to go to point A before I can go to point B? Okay. We can also use leguminous plants and trees. Okay. Who remembers what a leguminous plant and tree is able to do, should we say?
The pea,
Huh?
chickpea.
Yeah. So what do they do?
Take the nitrogen and fix it.
Yeah, they fix in their roots. They have bacteria that are able to fix air, the nitrogen that's all in the air, and then give it to the tree that's their host or plant. Okay, and we know that the neighbors also get a free lunch, so to speak. Okay, because there's excess nitrogen. So it works a bit like this. We've got our ground, we've got our nitrogen fixing tree or plant, and there's its roots, and then we could have another, we call this our target, and this is our support. Okay, so now we've got a shared root space. This one is fixing nitrogen, this one's not a nitrogen fixer, so it needs to get nitrogen from somewhere, and so it can take the nitrogen from its neighbor, because the neighbor has too much, it's in excess. Okay, so over here we could have another nitrogen fixer. Okay, we could even have different layers. We could have, like, you know, a little ground cover nitrogen fixer, clover as an example. You know, so you can have different layers. So you have a lot of excess nitrogen there, and there will be, some of them will die within a few weeks, some of them may survive for many years. Okay, but this is our target. So all of this is supporting our action to get this one to grow. This could be a high value fruit tree.
What's clover?
Clover is a type of plant.
Okay.
Yeah. So you've got these support species and you've got a target species. Okay. With the nitrogen in the root space here, our support species is still consuming nitrogen. Okay, not all the nitrogen is available to our target, but what we can do is we can cut our support leguminous plant down, and what it's going to do, it's going to regrow. Okay, it's not killing it, it's like a coppice or a pollard. Okay, and the tree will regrow, and it will regrow like a mum does after a rebirth. So like gives birth and she feels rejuvenated. Okay, the same for a tree. Okay, so it's actually a positive thing often. But what happens is this: you cut down this part and you do a cut and drop. So you don't need to take the plant away, you just allow it to decompose, so you're improving the soil conditions, you're adding biomass. Because you've taken away the plant's ability to do photosynthesis, it doesn't need most of its roots, so it automatically drops the root space. Okay, it only needs a little bit of root right now because it's only got a little bit of top, and often they're a bit like a mirror, right? You've got the canopy and you've got the roots. They're often a mirror of each other. Here's an interesting question. Where do you water a tree? Think about this, okay? These are our roots, okay? Our roots are growing from here. So the best place to water or to fertilize a tree is underneath the canopy, because that's where our roots are actually taking the water from and the nutrients from, okay? Not underneath by the trunk, okay? You're better off to do it underneath the canopy, okay? You can use that as the outside of the canopy as your place to know where to water and where to fertilize. So yeah, so by coppicing or pollarding our support species, we then provide a lot more nitrogen to our target tree, okay? And we also allow the whole vegetation to decompose with our cut and drop, okay? So I mentioned before that trees have many beneficial functions, okay? Let's talk about how that works. We've got our floor space, we've got our tree, okay? So it's raining, just started raining, and you're standing underneath the tree, okay? You stay dry for a while, right? You know, the canopy is able to absorb a lot of water, okay? And after a while it becomes saturated, and then this is the place where the plant drops its leaves, so it's a decomposition area, and it's kind of spongy. So now the ground here is very spongy, and then the plant has its roots, okay, and the roots allow the water to percolate, to infiltrate into the soil, and then the roots will absorb that water, and the water flows up and then evaporates this way, evapotranspiration. Okay, it gets taken up this side and it's released this side. Okay, so this is the water capture is very important. With our trees, okay, a big tree has such a huge surface area, it may represent 30-40 hectares, okay? So you chop down one tree, one big tree, you're just losing 30-40 hectares of capture for rainwater, okay? They're that important. There's that many crevices. Have a think about it. You know, the bark of a tree is all, okay? Each individual leaf, a leaf has something called stomata, little pores, okay? This is where the gas exchange happens in photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is where the plant is taking the sun's energy and converting it into ATP, sugars, okay? And it releases oxygen and takes in carbon dioxide, right? That's the basics of plant biology. The interesting point here is that during the day in the tropics, the sun is so strong that the plant is losing more water than it is able to retain, okay, if it's photosynthesizing. And so it says, I can't photosynthesize, I'm doing a siesta, I'm closing shop, okay, because otherwise I lose too much water and I die. Okay, so they close the stomata. In a country like Greenland during the summer, you know, I'm talking about the winter, I'm talking about the summer in Greenland. You know, Greenland's very cold in the winter. But in the summer, the sun is at a low angle for almost 24 hours of the day. And so the plants are able to photosynthesize for almost 24 hours a day. And so the harvest, you can get these huge pumpkins and all sorts of things in Greenland that, you know, would make the pumpkins we get here look like little shriveled dwarfs. Okay, the tropics are all year round, but when the sun is shining, it's too hot, and so maybe the plants are only active 6 hours a day. The sun's only available for 12 hours a day, 12 hours daylight, 12 hours night, and then 6 hours of that is too hot, so you're left with 6 hours of actual production. So the tropics are very productive, but the sun can actually be too much. Plants, like trees, are able to absorb a lot of water. Okay, so you've got the oceans, the sun hits the water of the oceans, it evaporates the water, and then it comes inland. Okay, so let's say this is our ocean here, and we've got our wet, humid air blowing inland. Okay, and if there's a tree here, it's able to capture and condense a lot of that water, and then it will evaporate through its system of evapotranspiration, and so the water will be transferred back inland, and we can determine what is the source of rainfall. Okay, is it from trees or is it from evaporation of the ocean? And we can find out now that trees actually give us 60% of the water inland. Okay, so they're incredibly important. So guess what? If you take away the trees on the coasts, inland there's a lot less water. Okay, in the Canary Islands of Africa, Spain, okay, there used to be trees called the rain tree around the outside of the islands. They cut them down, and now guess what? The islands are very dry, they burn all the time. I would probably guess like somewhere like California, the southern part of California, should have lots of coastal trees. They've cut them down, they've built big cities, and now California is burning. Okay?
And drying out.
And drying out, right? If they replanted with a good stretch, a nice belt of coastal forest, they could probably fix a lot of those issues very quickly. Okay? So the more trees that we've got on our coast, the more rain we're going to have. Okay? In general, the more trees there are, the more rain there is. On the leaves of trees, there's a bacteria, and this bacteria creates rain.
How?
There you go. I was waiting for someone to say how. The same way a rain dance works.
Evaporates.
How does a rain dance work?
Rain dance?
A rain dance. How does a rain dance work? Okay, so think about it, right? It hasn't rained, and there's a bunch of people dancing. So what are you creating?
Oh, movement, heat.
Movement is probably closer to what I'm looking for. What does that movement do?
Heat,
Energy?
moisture.
No,
Sweat.
dust.
Ah,
Okay, it's dry dirt, yeah? So you're creating movement of dust. Okay, so the dust goes into the atmosphere and it's negatively charged. And so it attracts water molecules. Okay, and then attracts more water molecules, etc., right? And so they get heavy enough to fall as rain. And you can do cloud seeding. It's been a technology that's been around for
The
50 years.
project.
Yeah. So they can do it with tea leaves and all sorts of things. And so anyway, the bacteria that are on all leaves of trees have the same principle. They float into the air and then they attract water molecules, which then fall as rain. Okay, so more trees, more bacteria, more rain. Okay. What are some of the other functions of trees? So we are working out in the hot sun, and then we come back underneath the trees. What do we feel?
Fresh.
Fresh. Okay. Why?
shade.
Shade. Yeah. So there's a shade. It's blocking the sun, literally. What else?
Humidity.
Humidity. So what do you mean by the humidity?
I don't know if the tree keeps some water. we can feel more humidity than if we're far from the tree.
Uh-huh. How's the tree creating humidity? Do you know?
Transpiration.
Transpiration. Okay? Specifically evapotranspiration. Okay, so because the tree is evaporating water, we have the physics law. You know, physics has all these bizarre laws, right? That you have to learn at school. Well, one of them is evaporation cools. So if something's evaporating, the ambient temperature is cooling. So trees are able to cool the ambient temperature. Okay, so the more trees there are, the cooler the ambient temperature will be. What about at night time? You're out and you're walking in the field, open field, no trees, and then you go into an area where there's trees. What do you feel?
More hot.
Hotter. Okay, warmer perhaps more than hotter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's the reason? Do we know?
Because they kept the humidity there.
They're creating humidity. Okay, they're condensing water. Okay, water is condensing onto the leaves. You know, if it didn't rain and you go out and look at the trees, sometimes there's all this water on them. Okay, because they're able to condense water. So the same is another physics law. Condensation warms. Okay, so trees are able to cool and are able to warm. So they're basically acting as a buffer. Okay, in the desert, there's no trees, there's no plants. The temperature is extreme. It can be really hot during the day and really cold at night. But in a forest, the temperature is much more in a much more narrow range because of the function of trees. Okay, so if we were living in a world where we're getting climate change, which basically means like more extreme events, it makes sense that if we reforest, that water's about to overflow.
Oh.
It makes sense that we're going to mediate and reduce the extremes of our climate. Okay, so if we want to manage climate change and improve things, it absolutely makes sense that we plant a lot of trees. What are some of the other functions of trees? How about their roots? Okay.
Contamination against the absorbent contamination.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can use certain plants for bioremediation, so they can actually take out pollution from soils. Okay, and they can neutralize toxins. But I'm thinking more on erosion levels. Okay, so again, if we think about someone like the Amazon, and people used to think, it was amazing soils that gave us all this, amazing biodiversity, but we quickly found out that if you chop down the trees, within a few years, with the heavy rains, the very thin layer of soil was washed away, leaving very little. They still continue to do it for whatever reason, but they figured out quickly that they couldn't do very much in the way of long-term farming. Okay, it didn't work because the energy and the system works in the canopy. 90%, 80% of the energy is in the canopy of the forest. Nothing to do with the soil. You take away the roots and that soil gets washed away. Okay, and if you're lucky enough to go to Foz de Iguazú in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Triple Frontera, okay, it's these huge waterfalls which are amazing. Okay, one of the best natural sites I've seen. And on the Argentinian side, when we do the tour, they said 20 years ago the watercolor was quite different. Okay, today the watercolor looks a bit like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Okay, it's that kind of color. But 20 years ago it was much clearer. And what's happened on the Argentinian side, they've been chopping down trees to plant transgenic soya. Okay, and so since the trees are gone, there's a lot of erosion of the topsoil. That topsoil is very important, and once it's in the river, it's out to sea, ciao, never see you again. Okay, so trees and their roots are incredibly important for keeping the soil in place, creating soil as well. As they're depositing their leaves and the reactions of the fungi, they're creating biomass, and that's improving and creating soil. Okay? What about wind? Okay? So you've got this huge open field, this monoculture field. A lot of people will actually lose a good percentage of their crop to wind damage. The wind comes along and it flattens. We're not talking crop circles and alien landings. We're just talking plain old wind, okay? And it flattens down crops, and then they're lost. They're no longer available to harvest, okay? But how do trees help us? They work like this. We can design an edge system, okay, a bit like this. So the wind comes along. Some of it's going to go through, and that's fine, that's good. And some of it's going to be diverted, okay? About 60% will go through and 40% will get lifted, okay? And that's enough that the big damaging impact of the wind will be a lot less, so our crops over here will be fine. What's going to happen is that the wind, what it does, it gets lifted, and then it does a little Ekman spiral and it goes down again. Okay, so we're going to need another bunch of trees here to lift them up again, and it's going to repeat. So rather than having big open fields, we should have small fields with tree boundaries. Okay, we can give 30% of our land back to trees and have no net loss in yield. Okay, what that means is you've got this is your yield here, okay, your crops, but you're losing 30% or more to wind damage. So if you give 30% of your land to the trees, they protect now your crop. So you're not losing your crop to wind damage. Okay? They can give you advantages on heat, they can avoid frost damage, all sorts of things. You can design things for different reasons. But we're talking about wind here. But 30% of your land can be given straight back to trees. And then you're also getting, potentially, a crop from the trees. They can be harvested sustainably. This could be food. This is habitat. So this is going to give you other niche species for other animals, other beneficial insects, maybe honey production, all sorts of things that you can get from that little edge. Okay, extra edge gives you extra benefit. Okay. We can also think about things like living fences. Okay, so here in Colombia we've got a lot of cows, and the cows need control, so people use wire and fence posts. Okay, and that wood comes from somewhere. But there's also the option to have living fences. So instead of using dead wood, we actually plant trees that will continue living and still provide the same structure for a fence. Okay, in different climates that may be cactus. Okay, here in La Guajira desert, if you go up to Cabo de Vela and all that, you'll see corrals made of cacti. Okay, those goats or whatever that they mostly goats up there, they're not getting past those cacti. I saw a great example again in Argentina. I was in up in Salta, the region there, and being from Europe, we don't have so many bars on our windows and doors. We're not so worried about security, but in South America everybody has highly fortified houses with iron bars everywhere. So I'm in this neighborhood. It's a safe neighborhood as far as I'm concerned. No need for bars. I couldn't see anybody shooting at each other. Anyway, so all the neighbors had bars and spikes, and I'm at my friend's house and he didn't. I said, you don't fancy putting spikes up everywhere? He said, no, have a look again at my garden. So I looked out to his garden, and the bushes were the spikiest, thorniest things you'd ever seen. Nobody was getting past them. Okay, it's a simple option. Okay, rather than spending all that energy and money on iron, which all you got to do is throw a blanket over it and jump over it. It's not too difficult. But a spiky bush, that's another matter. Okay, in the UK we're famous for our hedges, between neighbours. These nicely, pristine hedges between neighbours. You've got to respect the neighbour's space and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so how about not a hedge? What about a fedge? A food hedge. Okay, so you could have food between neighbours. In Europe and North America, it's a berry climate. In Argentina as well, it's a berry climate. Okay, you're far away from the equator. So berries often have spikes, so they act as good kind of prevention for people going past or animals going past. Okay, in certain places we've got maybe there's no trees, okay, or maybe there's no plants. It could be that if you're in an arid area, desert, and the rain is very infrequent, you could go and put some seeds out there, and by the time it starts raining, maybe the seeds have got eaten, or they got blown away, or they whatever, they degraded. But another way you could do things is you get a little ball of clay and maybe some animal poo, and you put the seeds in it, and you throw them as balls, seed balls. Okay, and then seed bombing. So if you're on a steep slope and it's too steep for normal people, I know some of you love rock climbing, okay, but for normal people who don't have ropes and things, to be able to easily get up and down those cliffs, it's difficult. But you throw a seed bomb, bang, 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 it sticks to the rock. When it rains the next time, imagine you're in the desert, it starts raining, and you're like, I'm watching the TV, watching a neighbour running around in the rain planting seeds. Okay, your seeds are already there, and the rain starts to melt the little bit of clay. You've got a nice bit of cow poo in there, so the seed's quite happy. It starts to grow. You're watching the football, whatever, so seed bombing. Okay. With plants and flowers, let's talk about flowers. So flowers are very pretty. You give the girls a flower, they're always going to be happy with you boys. And so we've got flowers. The same for insects. Okay, we can attract beneficial insects. Bees and pollinators need the food that we have in flowers. If we want to have their services, and they are essential to our well-being, then we need to feed them. Okay, so we need to provide food for the pollinators. Sometimes, here in fact in the tropics with the high rainfall levels, it can sometimes mean there's not much food for the pollinators. So what we should do is actually leave little dishes of sugar out for them, even like the hummingbirds, because if they can't find food, they're using so much energy so quickly they die. So we can actually help increase their numbers by providing sugar sources for them on the days when there's difficult conditions. Okay, and that will increase their numbers. So yeah, by having lots of flowers around, you're increasing the food availability for pollinators, which is going to be beneficial for all sorts of nice reasons. You can also use flowers as a distraction. Okay, so we've got insects that want to eat your food. Okay, and say, oh look, there's some nice food, I want to eat it. Okay, fair enough. You should really kind of think to plant too much. It's not all for you. It's to share it, for the natural environment as well. Okay, you're not going to keep it all. Some of it's for somebody else. Okay, it's for the environment. It's going to work in harmony that way. But at some cases you think, well, I want to help myself. So you can actually plant distractions. You can plant flowers that there's so many different colours that the insects, they kind of look at your garden and they go, oh, it's a bit chaotic. I don't know where to start. And they look at the next door neighbour's garden. It's all in nice, neat rows. It's like in the supermarket. You know, oh, there's the broccoli. There's the Heinz beans. You know, fish. You know, it's all there, nicely ordered, right? And they look at yours and, yeah, I don't know. I think I'll leave that one. So they'll leave your garden and they'll go to the supermarket instead, right? So by creating a kind of chaotic, lots of colours and smells and all sorts of things, then you're able to, protect your precious plants easier. Yeah, like nature. Does nature look like a supermarket? No. Okay, it's pretty chaotic at times. Okay, so we're trying to kind of mirror the way that nature, has designed things. Is God a better designer than us? Okay, so even some flowers, for example, like marigolds. You know what marigolds are? Some of you do, some of you don't. They're quite colourful. Sometimes you find them in salads, little flowers like that size. And in their roots actually produce a chemical, which it means that there's small worms called nematodes, and sometimes those nematodes can do damage to things like potatoes because they eat the roots, and then the roots get infected by fungi, so you get this this soggy mash of a potato. It's not edible. But if you planted marigolds, the marigolds produce this chemical, and then the nematodes don't want to go anywhere near it. There's lots of relationships between flowers and insects which are we're not aware of unless we really observe them, but very interesting things.